Episode 4 of Alien Earth begins with Wendy waking up to find Kirsch and the others looking over her. Her hearing has been taken offline for the time being, as Kirsch explains to the scientists here that the closer she gets to the xenomorph, the louder the frequency seems to get. Boy Cavalier shows up and organises traffic, deciding to bring her hearing back online, while Mr. Plot Armor himself, Joe, is still alive. He has a new lung implanted and is shocked to learn that there are deadly creatures in the lab. The engineers work to change Wendy's frequency before she recaps what we saw at the end of the last episode. Wendy doesn't want to go numb to the alien language though, believing they've picked her for this. Curly is fiddling with buttons in the lab and watches on enviously as Wendy broadcasts the alien's language through her own mouth. The chitters and chirps excite Boy Cavalier, who wants to do more tests, but Joe is worried about her well-being. Eventually Cavalier concedes and lets them go, but the billionaire reminds Atomind that these people, especially Plot Armor Joe, are living in his world, not the other way round. Alone, Joe explains to Wendy that he's mad at Prodigy for hiding what happened to his sister and keeping her existence from him. For now though, he promises to be here for her, but he has quite the grudge against Prodigy. Of course, it wouldn't be a Noah Hawley show without some trippy visuals and montages, and in doing so, this allows us to cut across to Morrow, who's still the best character in this show, and slightly. Morrow continues to manipulate his new friend, telling him to get an egg. They communicate telepathically again, where Morrow uses the logic of morals to get through to the kid. Morrow also manages to extract Slightly's real name, which happens to be Arash Singh. This gives him a lot of leverage over the guy, and rife blackmail material should this simp fail to comply. For now though, Slightly heads on inside and attempts to get the egg for Morrow, and he soon realises it's not going to be easy. But then, given we did see Wendy manage to head into the lab alone and pass out while nobody bat an eyelid last episode, maybe it's not quite so difficult? Still, in the lab, the experiments continue with the eyeball monster using a sheep as a host. Boy Cavalier watches this controlled experiment with fascination as it burrows into its eye and takes control. Cavalier and Kirsch are intrigued to learn the monster is highly intelligent, changing brainwaves and standing perfectly still, which is pretty ominous and quite eerie, watching each of them in turn. Elsewhere, Arthur takes his wife, Dame Sylvia, outside and explains his concerns regarding Cavalier and his synth children. He doesn't think what they're doing is actually science and still sees the children inside these robotic bodies. He wants to keep their protocols in place. Now Nib suddenly shows up and decides that she's pregnant though, so Sylvia takes her to her office and explains how babies are made, and then looks set to show her a diagram of an adult female body. Nibs is having none of it though, as it appears she's suffering from PTSD after her encounter with the eyeball creature on the ship. When she lashes out, Sylvia brings security in and decides she should be confined to her room and raises a level 3 event in the process. While this is going on, Joe is questioned by Atomind. He doesn't really have much of a choice but to comply, given Joe has a new lung courtesy of Prodigy, and he won't see Wendy again if he leaves the island, given she too is their property. Later that afternoon, Boy Cavalier brings Wendy in for a chat. She laments him for cutting open the xenomorph, forgetting that she herself defeated one of these aliens with a little knife last episode. Of course, this also meant cutting open the xenomorph and decapitating it with barely a scratch on her. As they talk, Cavalier uses Joe as leverage to force Wendy into working with him. He wants to find out exactly what these Xenos are saying and believes that she's the key to unlock that mystery. In exchange, Joe will be allowed to stay on the island. Now Morrow visits Slightly's mother in India and uses her to blackmail the synth into compliance. Instead of bringing the egg out, he decides Slightly should smuggle a human into the lab, allowing the facehugger to do its work. In the process, Morrow will then find him and bring the specimen out. Now, given an earlier chat from Kirsch to Slightly about loyalties and hearing no evil, it would appear that Kirsch knows about Slightly's connection with Morrow and is waiting for the right time to strike. As the episode closes out though, Kirsch watches as Wendy heads into the lab and finds the little baby Xeno creature break free from the lung. She reaches out to touch it and watches the creature in wonder as the episode comes to an ominous conclusion. So the ending to this episode seems to be going the route of having Wendy as this sort of goddess figure from the xenomorphs, which I guess wouldn't be too crazy given the lore surrounding this in the graphic novels, and using the one in the dark as a staple for Wendy's character journey. However, for someone who's supposed to be so intelligent, it's quite amusing that Wendy calls out Cavalier for cutting open an alien when she literally done the exact same thing an episode prior. As for the other characters, we have the drama involving Slightly that's starting to pick up now, and there's a decent enough dynamic between him, Kirsch and Morrow that looks to be reaching fever pitch. And speaking of intelligence, our boy Plot Armor Joe is back, to the surprise of perhaps nobody, and he once again shows off his lack of foresight. I'm not sure why Joe thought he'd be able to take his sister home, or why the evil corporation he works for is indeed evil, and it just feels like sloppy writing. It's not helped by the incessant need to recap what we've seen in previous episodes, like we haven't been watching along. To be fair though, I am quite interested to see how the show is going to handle Slightly bringing a human onto the island or into the lab, because the only ones that really fit the bill here that are actually on the island would be the human scientists, Cavalier or Joe himself. And given we already have a new Xeno that's hatched, and Morrow has all the data for the specimens downloaded into his head, surely it's only a matter of time before Yutani catch wind of what's happening on this island and launch an assault. If this episode proved anything though, it's that putting children's brains into synth bodies, which apparently is the way to super intelligence, has had the adverse effect to what Cavalier wants. If the show is trying to convince us that you're going to get better philosophical debates from kids compared to, say, Professor Brian Cox or other brilliant scientific minds, it's doing a pretty poor job of it. However, the ending is rather intriguing and leaves the door wide open for next week's chapter, so I guess we'll have to wait and see where this one goes next. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.